Man, leave it up to Rick Dalibor to ignite and stir up this Vancouver Canucks fanbase once again. Today we are going over the updates he had on Donnie and Dolly from earlier this morning in regards to the Vancouver Canucks and the newest update in their trade talks relating to the Calgary Flames. Now, last time we had talked about a Calgary player in Vancouver. It was with defenseman Nikita Zadorov. We talked about the conversations there, how the Canucks were interested in this defenseman, but if you go a little bit further back and you talk about some of the other guys that have circulated the Calgary Flames trade sphere, another name comes to mind that we have been talking about quite a bit on this YouTube channel. Flames defenseman Chris Tanev, a guy whom I have been such a big fan of ever since he was a rookie debuting with the Canucks in the Stanley Cup Finals in 2011. Tanev is an absolute shutdown stud. And sure, you could debate whether or not his effectiveness has aged gracefully. You could talk about whether or not it's really worth it to get a guy like Tanev at the cap hit he is at, but the guy expires at the end of the season. He is not making too much money, only $4.5 million a year, and Rick Dalibor specifically provided some updates as to the Canucks and their pursuit of Chris Tanev in today's Donnie and Dolly segment. Now, I'll leave a link in the description if you want to go ahead and listen to the audio hit yourself, but there were a few very main points that I felt that Dalibor brings up. First in the segment, he says that a ton of teams are in on Chris Tanev, and Tanev does have a no-trade clause. However, Dalibor notes that Vancouver is not on Tanev's NTC, meaning, assumably, that if he were to be traded, Vancouver is indeed an option. There you go, that's one hurdle in this entire race already jumped over. You then have yourselves the other news that Dalibor provides in regards to Tanev. He says that the Vancouver Canucks had talked to Quinn Hughes, and Quinn Hughes himself told the management just how much Chris Tanev is a valuable hockey player. Now, that was a very brief side comment that Dalibor mentioned, but I did think it was interesting that Quinn himself is telling the management, yeah, that guy's good. Like, I want that guy on the team as a very valuable player, shutdown guy. He played with me, not really with me, because when Hughes debuted, he was mostly playing with Shen, but you get what I mean, right? Chris Tanev has a reputation that is still ingrained within many of these Canucks players, and Quinn Hughes specifically, Captain Quinn, going out there and commanding this D-corps, has told the management that, yeah, I think that guy's a really good ad. Now, this is where things get really interesting, because Dalibor then says that the Vancouver Canucks have been pushing Anthony Beauvillier and Connor Garland repeatedly to the Calgary Flames in this Chris Tanev conversation, but the Flames say no. They don't want Garland. They don't want Beauvillier. What the Flames actually want here is a young prospect that can play in their lineup right now. Dalibor even notes that not even a second-round pick is good enough to get this Tanev thing done. The Flames want a young piece. And it gets a little more interesting when Dalibor says that the Flames would prefer to send Chris Tanev to the East. They don't want to keep him in the Pacific Division. It's a note that's been made multiple times throughout the many decades of NHL hockey that teams would prefer not to make trades interdivisionally. They don't want to see their guy come back to bite them in the behind 7 or 8 times a season. Like, the Flames would probably prefer not to get Chris Tanev shutting them down and blocking some shots in the next few months' worth of play. And the response to that is pretty much, hey, we prefer to send Tanev to the Eastern Conference. Maybe it's Toronto, maybe it's another one of these teams that needs a right-handed defenseman, New Jersey maybe even. Nikita Zadorov has been linked to all these Eastern teams as well, so if Chris Tanev is right there, neck and neck, then it would make sense if the Flames are more so focused on that East side. But when Dalibor talked initially about Vancouver, he did mention one name that would be tossed around maybe as a potential trade candidate. Not saying this is going to happen, but just aligning with what it is that the Calgary Flames had desired. If you take a look at the Tyler Toffoli trade, for example, they traded Toffoli away, they got Igor Sharangovich in return. Young player, stepped into the lineup, that's what the Flames want. Dalibor mentions Nils Hoglander as a name that might be of interest or that could potentially get this thing done. Again, he's not saying that this is the guy, but he's just throwing a name out there. And for Nils Hoglander, it's very interesting in particular because this is a guy that definitely still has more room to grow. He's 22 years old, drafted in 2019, second-round guy, should have been a first-round guy, and he has been scratched the past little while. The interesting thing is, that is noted on the Donnie and Dolly segment, is that Rick Tocchet does not currently trust Nils Hoglander, and there's a reason he's getting scratched. Tocchet actually himself labeled one of the goals against the Toronto Maple Leafs where Nils Hoglander made a mistake. He specifically called that out. So Dalibor and Donnie, they end up saying on their show that for Nils Hoglander, it's interesting because this is 3 coaches already, Boudreau, Green, and now Rick Tocchet, wherein he wasn't really able to earn that trust, wherein the way he's been playing, his play style, what exactly it is he does, his habits on the ice have not really manifested a full-time 100% NHL player because he still has that capacity to get scratched and to be taken out of the lineup and to not be given the keys to the car just yet. They tossed this guy's name out there as a potential suitor in some sort of a Tanev deal that the Calgary Flames might see value in. Not a Beauvillier, not a Garland, more so of a Hoglander. And I've been seeing a lot of other Canucks fans too throwing out names like Nils Amon and maybe some others. Hey, if your first name is Nils, you might be on the trade block, who really knows? But with this idea in mind, I have to ask the question out to you here. With Nils Hoglander being scratched, with him not necessarily being the most utilized player on this team, even though he has had a few good games this year, like he definitely has had some highlights in this season's worth of play, even if Nils Hoglander is that guy who has grown steadily and who has gotten a tad better, would you trade him for Chris Tanev? To end off the season, to make sure that everything goes the way it goes, with Carson Soucy now out for multiple weeks, would you trade away a guy like Nils Hoglander for Chris Tanev? What are the pros and cons of this? Well, if Chris Tanev comes to Vancouver, then all the things that we had talked about in the past videos, they come to fruition. In fact, you could debate that Tanev even gets a bigger role because Carson Soucy is going to be out. Tyler Myers is up in the air right now. That guy didn't practice this morning, so we'll see what happens with that chaos draft. But Chris Tanev coming over to Vancouver, having a very solidified presence on that second pair, maybe with an Ian Cole, maybe he stabilizes things out with a Noah Juleson or whatever, maybe they call up Matt Irwin. There's got to be a little bit more flexibility with this team. Hey, you know what? If you have Akito Hirose and Chris Tanev playing together, imagine Hirose learning from one of the best shutdown NCAA undrafted defensemen the NHL has seen in the past few decades. Chris Tanev could be such a good mentor stylistically to an NCAA talent like Hirose, who is still trying to find his groove. I feel like that's a pretty good matchup, and I just thought of that off the top of my head, so I'm pretty proud about that. But either way, Chris Tanev coming over to Vancouver, mwah, chef's kiss, I love that. But if you talk about Nils Hoglander going over to the Calgary Flames, there is an opportunity that the Calgary Flames just manage this guy a little bit better, or they allow him to exhibit his game to a better extent than Vancouver has been able to in the past 3 coaches worth of teams. I feel like if Hoglander actually becomes a breakout NHL player, top 6 guy, 40-50 points, he's going to be one of the most annoying players to play against over the next few years. Like, think of the way Nils Hoglander plays now. Just imagine if he was kind of better. Just imagine if his decision-making was more pristine. Just imagine if he was actually able to find that offensive touch. The way he forechecks and the way he battles for pucks and the way he has sort of a really clever playmaking element to his game, that's the kind of guy that's going to annoy the heck out of you for the next decade if you trade him within the division. So if you're a Vancouver Canucks fan, what are your thoughts on this trade-off? Would you like the short-term prosperity of a Tanev? Do you want to sacrifice the long-term ability of a Nils Hoglander? Do you think it's guaranteed that a guy like Nils Hoglander even becomes that good to the point where it's super annoying? Or do you think he stays more so in the realm that he's at right now, which is more of just a tweener kind of guy who doesn't really have the full coach's trust and who really has a bit more growth to go through before he actually becomes a middle to top 6 solidified forward? You could debate he was rushed into the NHL, honestly, based off of how he played in his first season, but either way, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about this Chris Tanev, Nils Hoglander thing. Link is going to be in the description if you want to go ahead and listen to the Donnie and Dolly video, because that's definitely a good listen as well. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Canucks fans are eating good today, baby. The bowl video, this video, and then the post-game video later tonight. Yeesh, it's going to be a lot, eh? And bye.